Good morning, everybody. We'll wait just one more minute, let a few more people join, and then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning during an active crisis to talk about crisis communications and issues management. We thought, what better time to do this than while we're in the middle of everything? So we hope everybody's staying safe right now, and thank you to all of our partners that have been reaching out to us to give us the latest updates and information about what's happening in your local area. That's imperative to our success in helping to inform visitors and to make sure that we're keeping people flowing in and out of your areas as best as possible. We'll get into that a little bit more, but without further ado, I wanted to kind of introduce our fellow panelists that are going to join me today. These are the people that will be speaking today. They're all part of our crisis communications team here at Visit NC. We have a lot more members of the team that are off camera and actively working to mitigate the situation we have right now and respond to it as well. So thanks to everyone that's here helping on the background with Hurricane Debbie, and thanks to Kathy from our PR agency DCI, and Jordan and Maggie from Luke Wire, who are going to help me walk through different channels and how we activate them at Visit NC, as well as how you might have some tips and takeaways for yourself at home. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Overview of how we handle things, how we maybe define two different types of issue management and crises here at Visit NC. Discuss the website, social media, and PR components specifically. We feel like those are some of the main key areas where most partners are looking for ways to communicate and best practices for that. So we'll get into how we do it and give you guys some advice on that. And then we'll talk about the role that you can play in helping us with our own channel. So it's kind of a dual webinar today. One is learn a little bit more about how we handle things and the role that we play, which is perhaps going to be a little bit different than you at a local level, and then learn how you at a local level can help us with our efforts. But let's jump right in. So the two ways that we sort of define crisis here at Visit NC is one, natural disasters, i.e. where we are right now with Hurricane Debbie barreling down through the coast and the Piedmont, and now actually having effects in the mountains as well. And then the other was what we would consider a hot topic event. This is going to be the stuff like politically oriented topics. Think HB2, think, very currently and recently here, the mask bill. Those are the type of things that we consider sort of these hot topics that might have an impact on how current visitors or potential visitors might be viewing North Carolina. It's same thing with the natural disasters. It's how our visitors that are here viewing and understanding the actual effects that storms and natural disasters and rock slides and floods might have in the areas that they are, and then also those that are looking to visit, how do they understand how those things are playing out, and very often, and more than not, maybe where are the areas that are truly impacted versus where are the areas that appear to be impacted if you simply just scroll on Instagram or look at the mass news media that oftentimes just says North Carolina is in a state of emergency when really it's a very isolated area. So a little bit more about that to come, but that's kind of the framework that we'll use today to discuss how we handle the two biggest issues that we face here at a state level. Again, our role oftentimes is in a support mechanism. In the natural disasters, we're often a support for getting messaging out there via the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Commerce, and the governor's office on what they're trying to communicate to residents. We then take a visitor lens to that and take the same messaging that they want to communicate and figure out what's the best way to appropriately message that and to tweak it to be relevant to visitors. So our role often is a support mechanism to the cabinet offices and to the governor as well. The other is when we're dealing with hot topics, it's very similar in a support role, but the people we play with might be different. We might add into that the North Carolina General Assembly, who often is creating the laws that oftentimes are controversial or misunderstood. And so those are the other people that come into play along with the governor's office and the Department of Commerce in that support role that we play in helping to craft messaging about the true effects of a piece of legislation and make sure that the public has information on it, accurate information on it, to then make their own best decisions and judgments about how they feel about that piece of legislation. We're not telling them how to feel. We just want to make sure that when they go to review it or judge it or critique it, that they have accurate information at their disposal to do so. A big thing for us, no matter how we're viewing it or what level of support we're playing versus taking a lead, would be our alignment. So another big tip on this slide is just to make sure that you all, as we are, often looking for alignment across our channels and how we're messaging. And we'll definitely give some more tips around that later on in the presentation. One of our biggest advocates out there in ways that we are communicating this information, and aside from our own media channels, so visitnc.com, our social media handles, and our email distribution, would be the call centers and the welcome centers at a statewide level. And they're integral in our ability to communicate to people and to help people both in North Carolina and outside of the state that are looking to evacuate here for safe stake, or that are looking to get out of the state and are just trying to find the right roads and the best ways to do so safely. If you're curious, like, do people still use call centers? Do people still use welcome centers? Yes. Just on a tourism basis alone, there were almost 3,500 calls to the 1-800 number last year just for tourism specific requests and assistance. And the welcome centers saw 7.6 million visitors collectively across the 9 welcome centers last year. So yes, it is big, it is huge. And what we do in times of need is have an ongoing dialogue with them, conveying to them the latest information that we have. When we ask you all to fill out those forms of special lodging, how do we help people with horses or with pets or with RVs that are looking to come up and get away? That's where that information goes. Outside of where we use it, we immediately disseminate that to the call centers and the welcome centers so that they have a resource on hand to help people that maybe have some sort of special need they're looking for outside of just give me a hotel room somewhere that's dry or safe. A couple things we wanted to walk through. This is sort of how we frame crisis on our end. There's sort of a 4-phase approach to it. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about some expert advice and opinions that we have on how to handle things in each of the phase. In the pre-incident phase, make sure that you've developed your crisis plan. Make sure you know who your team is that you're going to be calling into the war room, as you might call it, to get things ready. Work on some of those key messages and protocols. Figure out who your spokespeople are going to be. Have redundancy for that. Great example. Our fearless leader, Whit Tuttle, is actually out of the state right now. He's in the path of the storm still, so he's not safe, but he's out of the state. And so we had to make sure that we have contingency plans in place for how are we going to handle things without him. And you never know when someone that you think is going to be your main point of contact or even your spokesperson might be gone. So just make sure you have backup plans. Are you training your team, and working on opportunities for growth within, so that someone that maybe doesn't have that role right now can step into it when need be. Conduct those trainings, working with your local officials, figure out who are your emergency management people, who in your community are the people that are going to be most pertinent to getting you the information that you feel visitors need, and develop those relationships long before a crisis ever arises is going to be key for you. Your city council members as well, your mayor, county commissioners, elected officials, that you have to work closely with, oftentimes that are on your board. And so those are good relationships to build up. Understanding the role, learn more about the role that you should be playing. As we talked earlier, the role that we play often is a support role. It might be the same for you. You might be more of a lead, depending on your community and your needs. So really defining with those other stakeholders in the community, what are the roles that you should be playing as the tourism office, so that it's clearly defined and you know exactly how to come up with a plan to execute to achieve those goals. And then creating that shell statement, those shell plans, kind of get that all together before you ever get to that point. Phase 1, when something happens, when you find that a storm is coming your way, when you have a rock slide that happened in your area or flooding, When you have a piece of legislation that passes out of the blue, and you're now, hearing a lot of discussion around it and a lot of questions from people on your social media channels and your email, activate that crisis team right away. Make sure you're liaising with the local officials that you've identified up front are pertinent to your success to get accurate information that you can. Make sure that you pause your outreach. We're going to have our team at LukeWire talk a little bit more about that coming up. But one thing that people often forget is to take a look at what are some emails or some social media posts or even some web stories that maybe you had been planning to promote in the next couple of days when this crisis might be unfolding, and would they be better served to be held until you can deal with this and mitigate it, because might they come across as insensitive or ill-timed. So take a look at what you have going. Same thing with your paid advertising. Are there things that you were about to run or things you're actively running in digital that maybe you want to pause right now, because the last thing you want to do is to make it look like you're trying to draw visitors into your area when perhaps it isn't safe for them to travel there, or vice versa. And then work on those initial statements, as we mentioned as well. Kind of have a couple of examples and some shell statements that are ready that you'll certainly have to customize for each incident, but at least you have a good starting block there to look at. Phase two, in those first 6 to 24 hours after it's happened, make sure you're monitoring. Take a look at your social media channels. Take a look at your media monitoring if you have it, or just set up Google searches for the pertinent topics. But make sure you're keeping an eye on what the general public is hearing and saying about the issue at hand, to understand, are there things that are not totally accurate and correct that you want to then craft messaging around, or is it on track and are people pretty much saying what is true, and there's really at that point no need for you to jump in and get involved. Save yourself the time and look elsewhere for where you can put your attention and your efforts. Further liaisoning with those organizations and managing the crisis, that's important. Keep an ongoing dialogue with them about things as they shift, as they change. A lot unfolds in those first 24 to 48 hours. And then make sure you're updating your statements appropriately after you learn more information, like getting the sentiment and the tone of how things are being discussed and what information your local officials are wanting you to push out. And then kind of phase three and phase four can oftentimes flow together, but it's like that, after that first 24 hours ongoing, looking at things like updating that narrative. So as things change, oftentimes for us, we might talk about weather could be impacted on the coast, and then say weather is going to be impacted on the coast. And then we say these areas are under a tropical storm warning. And these, so we update it as the conditions, warrant. And then as things back down, we will take those things away so that people know that things are safe to return. Same things with the hot topics as well. We might craft a statement initially to explain a piece of legislation as factually as we can to everybody, so that they have an understanding when they reach out and complain that they don't like it or agree with it. We may have to go back and update that later if tweaks or changes are made to the legislation that warrants it, or if we're seeing a new spin on the narrative being taken that we hadn't thought of from the beginning that we want to make sure we can address. So just keeping an eye on and updating your narrative is really important. Reputation sentiment analysis is key, like we talked about before, whether it's looking at your social media feed or whether it's having a Google News alert set up, but make sure you're keeping an eye on what people are saying and how they're saying it, and decide from there if it's the narrative you want out there. Couple other tips that we have, messaging for those statements. It's key to understand that crisis response team that you create will look for key messaging, that they're going to involve those stakeholders. They're going to help figure out the audiences, for those messages that are appropriate. Some things aren't appropriate to put on social media. So this may be a better thing to put in an email. Perhaps you've got a lot more to say. And so therefore, just by the nature of character counts and of the media platform itself, it's going to be better for you to maybe send an email out or post something on your website. Some things are going to be really important for you to get on social media because perhaps that's where your biggest audience is. So how do you find the right way to take something that you wish you had more than 140 characters to communicate and do so effectively? Appropriate channels as well, and then the methods like we talked about. When you're thinking about statements to craft, be they for press conference in person, be they for your website, your social media, one thing to think about is this sort of five-pronged approach to it. Acknowledge the situation. There's no need to shy away from it. Make sure you're expressing that you are understanding and aware of it. The last thing you want to do is appear tone deaf. Provide empathy. Just understand that there's always two sides to a story if we're talking about a hot topic issue. And so there's always going to be two sides, two groups that are going to be either in favor or against something, and just being mindful of that is really important as you craft your, your narrative. You certainly don't want to offend an entire group of people. What you want to do is stay factual based and just let them make their own decisions from there. Values, like what are the values that your organization cares about? How do they align with perhaps that issue and that topic? Again, does that allow you and give you a little bit more direction in the things that you think you can say, and you're comfortable with that because it aligns with your mission, even if it does or does not agree with, maybe the piece of legislation. And then that approach and the actions describe how the crisis is being handled and addressed and the steps that you're taking. That's also important. If it's something that is in your control or if it's something that is in the community's control, how are you handling that? We are working closely with our local officials to blah, 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 that kind of thing. Make sure that you talk about how you're taking action instead of just acknowledging the kind of, first prong of this approach. And then keep that commitment to the public as well. Outline your plan and your next steps when you can and make that public to people to kind of hold yourself accountable and to make sure that they have trust that you're not just, putting words out of your mouth, that you've got an action plan behind it. Here's a little checklist that we like to go through to help make sure that we are hitting the things that we need to, never, like I mentioned before, never minimizing someone's pain or suffering. This goes for both the natural disasters as well as for the hot topic issues. Knowing the particular incident in questions, looking with local authorities. Remember, when you're crafting messaging to your own stakeholder groups as well, to take into things like, the sensitivity of a vertical, right? So is something that's happening going to have more of an impact on hotels than it will on restaurants or on water sports, et cetera? And how do you maybe think about crafting your messaging appropriately for those audiences? Some of them perhaps with a lot more stake in that particular topic than others. And so not all messaging could perhaps be the same there. It's in your best interest to really craft something specific for different stakeholder groups in your area. And then make sure that you're always reviewing the latest information available and updating things, as you can. This is another great checklist that we wanted to put in here. And again, all these slides are going to be available for you guys to grab later. But this is another great checklist if you're kind of in the camp of, okay, we know we need to say something and we maybe even kind of know what we want to say, but like, where's the best place to do it? Think of this as like a checklist to kind of help guide you to look at the different opportunities that are out there, whether it's email, social media, public announcements, emergency alerts, press conferences. Like, should we have one of these? Go look through here, and this can kind of help you to figure out if it's the right fit for your messaging and for the need you have. But I'm now going to hand it over to Jordan at LucaWire, who's going to talk us through the website component, both what we do and both some tips and ideas for you as it pertains to your website.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan, and like Scott said, I'm going to be talking about how we handle crises on the Visit North Carolina website. So if we want to go to the first slide, whenever we anticipate travel within the state or to the state is going to be disrupted in really any capacity, we have the ability to build an advisory banner that lives at the top of the website. I say any capacity because though we use it mainly for hurricanes and tropical storms, like how we're using the banner right now for Debbie, past advisories have included crises such as tornado impacts, flooding, rock slides, wildfires, dangerous rip currents, overwashes, and even government shutdowns, and of course, COVID-19. So really, in any instance where travel could be affected, we just want to make sure visitors are aware and that they know we're keeping their safety top of mind if they were to visit our website at all during this time of crisis. Thank you. And those are a couple examples of banners that can live at the top of the website. And if we want to move on to the logistics slide, thank you. In terms of the logistics of the advisory, we are able to easily toggle between alert levels, and it all just depends on the severity of the crisis in that moment. So you'll see here screenshots of banners we had for Tropical Storm Isaias a couple years ago, but the intent here is just really to show you the different color levels. So obviously those dates aren't accurate. The lowest alert level we have displays as a green banner, as you can see, and this informs visitors that there is a crisis and just basically reminds them to be alert and be aware of changing conditions and just really be aware that something is happening out there. The middle alert level we have displays as gold, and this alerts travelers to the impact that the crisis could have on travel and really reminds them to call ahead and confirm any reservations, events, hotel reservations, any type of travel like that. And then the highest alert level here displays as red, and this indicates really that there's an emergency crisis. This advisory alerts travelers to the crisis and then also encourages them to kind of change your travel plans. And don't worry, in the next slide, we'll talk a lot more about all the copy that goes into each of these advisories. And so, one more back. Thanks, Scott. We also have the ability to specifically determine on which pages we want the advisory to live. So we've seen that crises can be pretty unique, and we know that they're not all equal in terms of severity. So the most common placements we encounter are, first and foremost, placing the advisory everywhere on the website, right? These are for the dire situations where the situation is really impacting travel all across the state. So this is going to be your hurricanes, your tropical storms, your government shutdowns, that type of thing. We can also place the advisory on just the region page and the sub-region pages that are being directly affected by the crises. So for example, earlier this week, we had Tropical Storm Debbie advisory living on the Piedmont page, the coast page, and all 11 sub-regions contained within those regions, because that's where we thought the storm and related flooding was really going to impact travel the most. But another example of that would be if there was a rock slide or a mudslide on the Blue Ridge Parkway or something similar, then we would probably only put an advisory on the mountains and the mountain subregion pages. And then lastly, we can place an advisory on a single subregion page as well. So this is for those super specific travel occurrences and would be for situations such as an overwash on a coastal road that has it closed. And all these determinations and changes, so say we wanted to upgrade a gold advisory to a red advisory, we can make that change instantaneously, which is really convenient and nice. And so then on the next slide, we are going to talk about the contents of the actual advisory itself. Now, we all know each situation, each advisory is going to be different. It's going to be nuanced, but there are many similarities among them all that we tend to put into the body of the advisory itself. So typically what's included in an advisory is a high-level explanation of the crisis and how it's impacting travel, language encouraging travelers to be aware and or call ahead to their destination to confirm their travel, depending on the alert level, phone numbers and hours to the call center and to welcome centers, links to Ready NC and Drive NC for road conditions and updates. And for dire crises such as hurricanes and tropical storms, we will link to partners' evacuation orders if there are any at that time. And if the crisis is affecting national parks or state parks, the ferry system, the Blue Ridge Parkway, or any other type of similar attraction, we'll link to those pages as well, especially if they provide additional information. And then throughout the entire advisory, we will weave in general safety information too, such as beach safety, not driving through water, be aware of your surroundings, that type of thing. And we will also typically link to major attraction closings or event cancellations, but we don't keep a comprehensive list of all those closings and cancellations. Instead, what we do is we really lean into language, encouraging travelers to check with attractions themselves or DMOs themselves, since it's difficult to monitor every single attraction in real time. And then similarly, we will also typically mention major highway closures, but we'll point the visitors to the experts at the Department of Transportation, North Carolina Department of Transportation, and Drive NC just for all those real details of the highways. So that is how we handle advisories on the website. And I'm going to now hand it off to Maggie to talk about social.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. So in terms of social, we know that, after everything Jordan just talked about in terms of writing up travel advisories, keeping your website updated, social is oftentimes one of the most high touch channels for your destination to travelers, just because people spend on average over 2 hours a day on social. So how do we manage these types of events, natural disasters and hot topics, especially as we are in the middle of Debbie right now? And as we are coming up on an election season, we have some pointers and some tips on how to manage both of these. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about, we already know that these are two high level types of crisis management situations that we deal with on social natural disasters as we're dealing with right now. The unfortunate part of this is that we do have live examples of this on our pages right now. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those decisions that we've made this week as we're in a crisis situation. And then in terms of hot topic events, how do we continue talking about these events internally, and how do we make decisions on how to engage with them on social? So we'll talk a little bit about those, and I've made these handy dandy charts that will be easy for you to refer to later. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about natural disasters and how we manage that on social. And on the next slide, we'll see this, that the first and foremost, the role of social in your crisis management plan is to connect travelers with relevant resources in preparation for or during a natural disaster. The rule of thumb here is that proactive is always the best way to be, especially when it comes to weather events that you can see coming a few days in advance. So that's why, at the beginning of this week, that's when we started working on travel advisories. That's when we started planning, okay, when are we going to put social posts up? And so first, we're going to talk about how to handle your content in the event there's an impending natural disaster or a natural occurrence that's just occurred and we need to hop on it. So we typically do not take travel advisories to social until it gets to be the warning level, until we know there are going to be more widespread effects on traveler behavior. And so once we reached that gold status on Debbie, we activated the internal social team to do the following. First, we work with our paid team to pause paid content on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. Meta platforms typically trigger the most negative conversation, as well as the most conversation that might not be relevant or helpful in the situation of a crisis management situation. And so what we like to do is we like to turn off that paid content for the duration of the natural disaster, to more monitor other conversations that are happening online, and to remain sensitive to anything that might happen in the coming days. The second one, which is a really big one, we check our social calendar and pause or move unrelated organic content for the duration of the event. So, for example, this week we had a post about fishing on the coast that we pushed back a week because an organic post that was already scheduled. We pushed it back a week because with the rising tides, the increased chance of any travel disruptions on the coast, we want to make sure that that activity is promoted at a time where people aren't worried about the conditions of those locations. So we like to push that back. And this also applies to partner co-ops. We make sure that any partner that has an upcoming co-op post for the week, that any natural disaster that might be coming our way, any weather occurrence that isn't really normal, we make sure that those events aren't going to impact the performance or the travel consideration associated with that co-op. And so if our team deems something that we're like, okay, like this is not going to do right by this partner, our team will reach out to you individually to ensure that that post is going live at the most opportune time and the time that travelers will be most receptive to planning travel to your location. So I wanted to make a note about that just because I know y'all are investing in these programs, and I want to make sure that those have the best chance as we're amplifying your destinations. And so the third is also what you will see live on our Facebook and X platforms right now, as well as Instagram. We posted it earlier this week. But we post and pin content linking to updated travel advisories, since that's the most dynamic piece of content when it comes to weather events. So we post and pin that content to our social channels to ensure that the first thing that people see when they come to visit and see channels is that travel advisory, so they can be linked to the most recent updates and resources as it pertains to travel in North Carolina. So we keep those pinned for the duration of the event until we're in the clear, and we move on from there. So that's to make sure that travelers have those resources as they come to our page, and that we are giving them all the resources they need to make smart decisions and letting them plan ahead and prepare. And then in terms of community management and answering any questions from travelers, as you receive those comments and direct messages, community management should also serve to connect travelers with those resources and updates. We have a few tips on making sure that you have your ducks in a row ahead of time, so that when there's a stressful situation like a tropical storm, you have all the resources at hand to respond to those people quickly and easily, in a way that, you might be doing 5 million things to manage the situation as well. So the first one is to anticipate your frequently asked questions, especially staying up to date on those major attraction closures in your area. Again, on Visit NC's travel advisories, we list a lot of major attraction closings. However, that's not always comprehensive. So we want to ensure that, you are the experts on your destination, and people are more likely to come straight to you for some of those more local attractions. So anticipate those questions, what people love, and you're the most connected with those operators. Second, formulate 2 to 3 go-to responses that you can tweak and personalize a little bit to people who are coming to you with questions, and keep those people up to date on advisories and travel information. And then also keeping those important links handy for those wide range of needs. If there's an evacuation order, if there are some accommodation options in your area, especially as, if people are evacuating from the coast to the Piedmont, or from the Piedmont to the mountains, you have some local options that are open for people to stay during this time, but as well as up-to-date road or park closures, or a link to Drive NC, places that have those continuously updated resources. But overall, just staying open to answering traveler questions and direct messages. And on the next page, I have a few screenshots of what we call our mini content toolkit when it comes to natural disaster management. This is from Hurricane Ian. However, we have the most recent Tropical Storm Debbie examples up on our pages right now. They're up there, they're pinned and featured on our Facebook and X pages again. But we have story and caption templates that we keep internally. So when those travel advisories get upgraded to warning level, we're able to jump into action, draft something up very quickly, and then get that up and live as quickly as possible to ensure that people have the information as proactively as possible. And on the next page, we have some tips on hot topic event management, especially as we're coming up on an election season, and a lot of, contested conversations are happening online, as well as, unfortunately, there are tragic events that do happen within the state and nationwide that, as a brand and as a destination, we still want to remain sensitive to. So the role of social kind of diverges in that sense. So in the event of those widespread tragic events, the first thing is to remain sensitive and sympathetic as a brand in the face of tragedy. And then in terms of, more of those politically oriented hot topics, mitigating the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and misdirected negativity stemming from these current events. So as the state of North Carolina, we do get some of that misdirected negativity on our social channels. And this is a little bit of how we handle those situations to ensure that we are not, deflecting any of that negativity back out onto the internet, because it's a very volatile place these days, and we want to remain neutral and promoting positive travel experiences. So first, when it comes to managing content in the event of a national or a local tragedy, you never know these days. The first thing is to pause paid content, again, on those platforms like Facebook and Instagram, to remain sensitive. And then pausing and moving unrelated organic content back 2 to 3 days, or as long as or longer, depending on the scale and impact of the event on your community. That's really up to you in terms of when it feels right to post, but we like to take stock of, how people are being impacted by an event and, leave breathing room on the page for that period of time. But in the event of political volatility, it's a little bit different. So the first thing is, do not pause your paid or organic content in the event that something happens politically, something that may pertain to either side, but pausing your paid or organic content can insinuate you feel a certain way about political events from your brand and destination. And you never want people to assume you feel a certain way. We're all here to promote travel, and we want to ensure that's not alienating anybody. So the second thing is paying close. The main thing to do here in terms of content is to pay close attention to comments across all the posts. Be checking your notifications pretty frequently because it can bring out increased negative commentary no matter the subject of the content. And we've even found that sometimes people will go back months, maybe a couple years on posts and start spamming negative comments that aren't associated with our brand specifically as VNC, but they are, very politically oriented and they want to be seen by people. So pay close attention to people who may be commenting across posts. And that's when you shift into community management mode. So the rule of thumb here in terms of dealing with these comments and conversations is, if comments are abusive or they do not apply to the post at hand, they're completely unrelated to your brand, they're completely unrelated to anything you've been talking about as a destination, do not engage with them. It only serves to amplify what they're talking about. And, again, you don't want to insinuate you feel any which way about a certain thing. Instead, we recommend doing the following. First of all, hiding abusive comments. Nearly every platform allows you to make comments invisible to all users except for the person who posted it. So they won't say, oh, you deleted my comment, you're deleting comments. It's more of a, okay, like this is not relevant to my page. This is abusive. This is not following my community guidelines. You're able to hide it to everybody but the poster and yourself. And then these can be hidden on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And as an add-on to that, you can edit. Certain platforms have spam filters that you can edit. So platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok allow you to create lists of keywords that will automatically, when they show up in your comments, they'll automatically hide comments using those words. So it's kind of like a first line of defense when it comes to these comments. And it kind of streamlines that process for you a little more, and you can edit it as you go if you see things pop up pretty frequently. And then the third and probably most important, and this is something you can do every day, is amplifying positive, relevant comments. The relevancy, a lot of times the most relevant comments as deemed by the platform will be shown first. And so they can be counteracted with engagement on positive comments. So dropping a like on a positive comment or a positive response can ensure more visibility of those positive sentiments than negative comments. So those are just a few rules of thumb, as well as some recommendations in handling some of those comments. But as we get into election season, things are going to change, things are going to evolve. So wanted to make sure you had some guidelines around that. And so those are my tips in terms of crisis management on social. And next, I will hand things to Kathy to talk about public relations.
Hi, everybody. I am here to talk to you quickly about how Visit North Carolina handles the media, PR side of things, and also how those tactics that Scott was talking about earlier really apply to the messaging across channels, whether it's the website, whether it's social media, whether it's speaking in terms of media. Basic principles apply. There's slight differences across the board, of course, but you'll notice as I'm going on, a lot of the same things that Scott said, that Maggie said, that Jordan said, are also going to come out here when speaking with the media. So next slide. let's get started. The first thing in determining when a crisis hits is, what do we say? Is the crisis a natural disaster? As we were talking about later, this is really the situation in which tourism does need to speak. We need to look at the crisis itself, determine, is it local in nature? Is it statewide in nature? Is it related to crime? Is it related to politics? And really determine then who is the proper authority to speak to that crisis. Most of the time, it's not going to be tourism. Most of the time, it will not be the local DMO or the state Visit North Carolina speaking. It's going to be the agency who's dealing with whatever that crisis is, whether it's perhaps there's crime, perhaps there is gun violence, perhaps it is political unrest. None of these things are anything that tourism would touch. Keeping in mind our main role, Visit North Carolina is primarily to promote tourism, visitation to the state. It has nothing to do with politics. It is solely about who is coming, getting those visitors to come in, and deciding when to respond is very important. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because, as Scott said, we're going to leave this with you as a takeaway. But to keep in mind, the primary aim here is always, when a crisis hits, is to promote and protect the brand Visit North Carolina and stay away from any unintentional association of tourism with negative crisis-related news stories. Next slide. So here, obviously, you can go on the website, look at the statement there. When speaking with the media, you want to stick to one message, one voice, speak in the same language. So as Scott had shown you before, any crisis statement, whether it's for the website or social, or in this case, when you're speaking to media, is going to take basically the same elements. So as he said, you want to acknowledge, express awareness of the event, empathy, especially if there are victims, people who are hurt in the situation, people who are affected. If it's a flood, perhaps their home or business was severely impacted. So you want to make sure that you're being sensitive to the issue at hand. Express values, what the organization's about, speak directly to where can we direct them? This is a very important takeaway. What are the actions that we're taking, and where do they go for more information? So here in this particular example, we're letting them know about the hotels, the restaurants, the attractions. Are they open for business? Are they not? Where has the crisis occurred? Airport status. It's, yes, where a lot of people are coming in via the roads, so we need to talk about road closures, but there's also airports, people coming to fly in, and we want to make sure that we're communicating that message as well. And then, as we had noted, we want to make sure that we're giving them the resources. So where to go for more information, please check X website. This is where they can go to get more information. For the press, we want to give them a specific email, a specific person to talk to if they're media, because we want to make sure that we're connecting the press with the appropriate spokesperson, whoever that might be. Because everything with a crisis, and as you've heard Scott say, and Maggie and Jordan, so much is prepare in advance. The more that we have done in advance, canned statements for each different type of crisis that we can then tailor to the specific crisis, the better off we are. So rule of thumb, rule number one in a crisis situation, have your statements ready in advance, as Scott was saying. Next slide. So when speaking with the media, again, prepare. Can't stress that enough. You want to make sure that you are understanding the audience. So what outlet is the journalist representing if you're speaking with them? Are they from a major national outlet? Are they from a local outlet like the Charlotte Observer or CBS 17 Raleigh, or where, you know, who are they talking to? Or perhaps the journalist who is asking you questions is from a travel trade, which is an entirely different audience all together. They're talking to travel advisors, tour operators, things of that nature. So understanding your journalist and who that audience is will help you frame what the proper response should be. So it's also important to keep in mind, obviously, it's the digital era, right? So whatever you say, whether it's to a reporter on the news or whether it's to, you know, a print journalist, pretty much everything is out on the internet these days. So just keeping in mind that, you know, what you say pretty much is out there, and, you know, anyone with a phone, laptop, personal device, or other, anyone connected to the internet is going to get your message. One thing that people forget when press are contacting you and looking for your statement, your information, it's okay to not have to respond immediately. You don't. It's always better to be proactive, but you also want to be sure that you're prepared. So ask to receive questions in advance. The journalist may not give them to you, but it doesn't hurt to ask. There are instances where journalists are very kind and forgiving and want to portray your brand in a positive light, and will go ahead and do that. Or perhaps they'll give you general direction. Either way, it's a good thing to ask when you can. But either way, especially in the cases when a journalist doesn't give you their questions or a general direction, again, back to prepare. So in advance of any crisis ahead of time, you can go ahead and say, okay, here is, you know, crisis situation A, here's a hurricane is striking. What are the type of questions that a journalist is going to ask? Write them out, write out your answers, rehearse. You can tailor it again in the future. Then knowing what a journalist wants. Who is the journalist that you're talking to? What is their reporting style? Do they tend to ask open-ended questions? Are they inclined to sensationalize? Are they straight out hard-hitting journalists? Knowing this in advance will help you be prepared in your response and knowing what the journalist is going to come at you with. Then plan for the worst. You know, we all hope that a reporter is going to be kind and ask good questions. But of course, there are also times when they're going to really come at you, hit you hard, ask you difficult questions, and expect you to have an answer. Imagine the most embarrassing, difficult, threatening type of questions that you could answer, and then you'll be prepared. So plan for the worst always, and then don't let a reporter bully you, consider or just, you know, outright badger you. Some journalists will do that. So just remember your talking points, stick to them, and you'll be okay. Next slide. So a little bit of do's and don'ts. Particularly when it's a live interview, a press briefing, you're on camera, you want to determine where you should be looking. It's important to maintain eye contact in a conversation. So you don't want to be looking away, looking down. That can make you appear shifty or as though you're trying to avoid a question when it may not be the case. Excuse me. Second point, you want to be relaxed. You want to be candid. You don't want to appear stiff or nervous or as though you're unsure of yourself. That's the last thing you want to do. You want to maintain your credibility, authoritativeness, and come across as strong, be able to deliver your message. Also be brief. Simple facts stated simply is the best way to go. You don't need to feel that you need to expound upon a simple fact to fill space, which is another trick that reporters like to use. They'll leave you with open-ended space and make you feel like you need to fill that dead air. Don't feel you need to. It's not your responsibility to fill that space. It's the journalists. So into that same vein, stick to the facts. You don't want to guess or hypothesize or in any way not provide the facts. So stick to the facts. Only the facts is the way to go. And you don't want to complicate the issue. So also establish your message early and maintain it. So if you have your key points, as Scott was saying, prepared and ready, that's what you want to stick to. So consistency is key. Repeating your message will help ensure that that message is understood by the audience. So you want to be positive. Remember, you're the spokesperson, you're the expert, and the real audience is who's watching, not the interviewer. So don't let them push you around. Another tactic that journalists will use is asking you questions that are leading or otherwise getting away from what you might be wanting to speak about. They all have their own ideas of what they want to get into. So they'll say something like, would you say? You don't want to fall into that or repeat what narrative they want you to take. You want to stick to your narrative. So you don't need to respond to hypothetical questions or leading questions. If a question is phrased in a way that you don't like, don't go there. You want to use a bridging technique to get back to your message, or skip right to the positive and just ignore that part of the question altogether. So what you can say when we say a bridging technique is, rather than repeating their question, you would say something along the lines of, I'm not the appropriate person to talk about X, however, and then go back to your key messages. And then most importantly, you want to provide a call to action at the end of all of this. You want to make sure that you're telling people where to go for more information, what's open, how they can get there, and what we can do. Those are the main points for media. And before I turn it over to Scott, I just want to remind everybody that you can use the chat to ask questions, because we will shortly open it up to Q&A, and that way we can see what you're asking in advance. So thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I want to talk a little bit now about how you guys can get involved and help us out to help you out during these situations. The first is the email address that we've set up. So if you all want to take a note of this, if you haven't used it or seen it already in the emails that we sent out this week, but if you have any information pertinent to your area that you feel we need to know to help communicate to visitors, just send it to alert@visitnc.com. And that will go to a plethora of team members internally here at Visit NC, as well as our agency partners, so that we all get it at one time and can figure out the right way to message it on our different channels that we have at our disposal. A reminder, don't just email us when something is maybe going to be closing or something is going to be affecting your area in some way, shape, or form. Let us know when it's not as well. Let us know when things reopen, for example, or let us know when an issue kind of is fizzled back down and we don't need to help you to try to address it anymore. So oftentimes it's, getting the information out there, right away, but make sure you close the loop with us as well and let us know when you have the all clear on a literal, crisis or on a hot topic, issue as well. And then the last would be making sure that you've got the form that we have created for that special accommodations when it pertains to evacuees coming up to the state or coming through the state. That's a form that we'll keep that's evergreen. We'll make sure to send it out to you all during the times of a natural disaster. And we want to make sure that you all have access to it and can fill it out to help us. Another little reminder of how you can help would be, if you're a local DMO, please just make sure to remind your local hotel partners and lodging partners and Airbnbs and short-term rentals out there about the state's price gouging laws. The Attorney General is very serious about following up on those. They do monitor them. People will get fined. So it is a various thing. Although it is a blessing that when things happen, oftentimes parts of North Carolina, if not at times all of North Carolina, can benefit economically from people being displaced during a disaster. We do want to make sure that we're pricing those accommodations accordingly to not make sure that we're exceeding the increased rate that would then trigger the state's price gouging law. So just something to kind of be mindful of. It's our due diligence to make sure that we communicate that out to you guys and that you guys can send it down to your local lodging partners as well. With that said, we wanted to open things up to questions that anyone might have, and all of our panelists are here to help answer them depending on the topic at hand. And I'll hand it over to Katie, who's, I think, been monitoring the chat. Katie Bailey on our team.
We have not gotten any questions other than folks asking if they can have a copy of this deck, which of course we will export this and add it to the partners website later this week or next week.
Anyone have any live questions you want to throw out? I know there was a lot in here. If not, again, here's our individual contact info. Happy to follow up with you guys at any point throughout the year if you have any questions that we can answer, or any ideating that you want to do. We just gave you our purview and our points of view, but we certainly value the same from you guys. So if you've got better advice or tips or something that you're doing that might work and help another partner out, please, let us know. It's also a topic that comes up quite often, so this could be something we could do again at the Visit NC Tourism Conference as a breakout session. There's plenty of ways we can keep this conversation going and evolve best practices around it collectively. And then I guess if there's no questions live, then we'll just make sure you all have a reminder of our next upcoming partner webinar. We have a Microsoft certified expert coming to help train everybody on best practices for using OneNote. I will personally be the first person to register for this event and attend as a regular OneNote user, but certainly not an expert. I've been trying to get more digital, and I've also been trying to streamline where I'm keeping track of all my stuff. And OneNote is a lot more powerful than just a digital version of a Post-it note. So if you aren't aware and not using it, or even if you are and you're looking for some tips to streamline your use of it, please make sure you attend that webinar. It should be good, and I will be there along with you as an attendee this time. But thanks, everybody. Please stay safe. I said, keep us in the loop as the storm passes your area. Let us know when things reopen. Let us know of any impacts that might be lingering. If you've got flooding or power outages or some major attractions or hotels that might be down for a couple of days or more, please let us know so we can continue to communicate that out to everybody. And if not, I want to just thank Jordan and Maggie and Kathy for joining us today. Luckily, all of us held power and internet to get through this, and our fearless leader, as we said, is attempting to get himself back into the state from New York. So everybody, thoughts and prayers with Whit as he tries to get back down here today. But thanks so much, everyone, and we hope you have a great weekend, and hopefully this storm will weather it together.